The agenda this week met the new voice of Canadian Inuit, looked into the hit makers who write the songs for the musical superstars, questioned the rise of nativist politics, and considered how to be better owners to man's best friend. The agenda's Week in Review begins with our future friends, chatbots.
We're surrounded by a soup of algorithms, all sort of offering a soft form of control. The algorithms are not transparent to us. They're giving us advice. It's very convenient to take the advice. And it creates a situation where, like all interaction, I can see a world, a dark world, in which all interaction is mediated by these algorithms and we're separated from each other. What my point is, it's a question of design. I got this from Alan Kay, who was one of the inventors of personal computer, who basically said it's our decision whether these machines are going to be our partners or whether they're going to be our masters or our slaves. And that's a design question. That's up to the people who are building these systems. And that's why I'm slightly optimistic. These things aren't evolving by themselves yet.
He's only slightly optimistic, Jesse. You heard it.
But I think it's important to describe these as technologies of control. I mean, they seduce us because they make us feel that they'll make our lives easier. But as John mentioned, they're very subtly controlling us. They're telling us when to leave for an appointment. They're, asking us in Zhao Ice's context about our feelings and how we felt. And there are very subtle ways in which we are changing our behavior based upon our interaction with Facebook, with Twitter, with Instagram, and the extent to which that these systems become smart and responsive and actually get to know us is very much a technology of control, which if it's not transparent, if we don't know why it's making these decisions, how do we know it's making it in our best interest? And I think that's where there is a need for regulation. I mean, can you imagine an environment in which you had a federal agency that regulated chatbots? Because chatbots would have such power and potentially put young people in such harm's way that they should be audited to make sure that their algorithms don't actually manipulate people in the wrong way.
I can't tell if you're being serious here.
Well, that's just it. I'm being ludicrous. But at the same time, it's totally plausible because of the power that this technology has, because of how intimate our relationship is with it.
Well, it's also not knowing necessarily what information we're giving over. So again, it's not always a conscious decision on the part of the user, is that you're showing patterns of your own behaviors and your own desires that you may not even be consciously aware of yourself, that are being recorded and then fed into an algorithm that's being fed back into you.
Jesse?
Well, and if you are going to create gendered bots, which I think is what's happening because the manufacturers, the designers are choosing sort of feminized bots. So if you were to create a realistic young male bot, would it try to get you to take your clothes off? Would it try to, persuade you as to why you should go on a date with it? Like, do we create idolized versions, or do we look at what people are actually doing in chat platforms and recreate that behavior?
Jesse, you're freaking me out now.
No, but it's the question. Like, is it idealized behavior that we're trying to create? Or is it realistic behavior that we're trying to create?
Well,
that's a lot of power in the designer's hands, and these are very important decisions which then impact people's behavior.
So let me ask the three of you. I want to ask the three of you the personal question, which is, would you have Zhao Ice loaded onto your phone? You would, Jesse?
Yes, absolutely.
You would, because why?
Curiosity. I mean, Google Now, which is Google's equivalent of Cortana and Siri, is on my phone. And Google knows everything about me. It is ridiculous, the types of articles it suggests, the types of things it tells me to do. So I would like a second opinion. I would like to have a second voice on my phone to argue with Google and say, well, my algorithm came to a different decision based on the same information. I'd like to have a chorus of voices all arguing with each other as my own personal parliament.
We'll get right on that. Okay. Do you think a song is better when it comes out of an artist's, a songwriter's soul as opposed to being written by a committee?
I don't think there's an answer to that. I don't think there's a yes or no. I think that there is always schlock being made. There's so much forgettable music, and then there's the stuff that pokes out. There's the stuff that pokes out from the factory. Out of all of the stuff they're regurgitating, there's the one that's like, wow, that's really interesting. Because I've been in the room with those kind of people, and they are rearranging songs in interesting ways. They're like, what if we start with the chorus? Or what if the chorus goes really down instead of way up.
So even in committee, there is a creative process happening.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they are aware that that stuff has to kind of poke up above the rest of the forgettable stuff. And I think it's the same with people who are writing their own songs. They can't write a million amazing emotional songs that really grip everybody.
Adele can.
Well, I think Adele has a lot of help. She doesn't.
She's got plenty of help.
She's got.
She does, eh?
I'm sure there's a committee with that, and I think part of the artistry for if we're talking about the artists who are singing these songs, part of their artistry is choosing the right songs and then singing them in a way that is convincing us that that's their song, and that is a hard job. I can't do that. I can only sing my songs.
I thought Adele does not write her own stuff. I mean,
Well,
she writes some of her own
collaborates,
stuff.
but all of those songs. Greg Kurstin is the main songwriter on most of those songs. Max Martin wrote one of those songs. All of those songs are co-written.
Do you think the audience prefer, never mind what they prefer to believe, but do you think they actually prefer, in terms of making a connection with the artist, that the artist write the song?
I think they want to believe that the artist wrote the song. I think it makes the song more powerful to believe that the artist woke up one morning, sat down at the piano, and the song just poured out of them.
Right.
Of course, you want to believe that, but really, that doesn't happen all that often. Maybe
Alan,
it
does it
happens
matter to
once
you?
in a while.
Well, it matters to me, but again, I'm a pop snob, a rock snob. So, but one of the things that we need to keep into perspective here is that what we're talking about is pop music, which by its very nature is ephemeral and evanescent. It is of the moment. So we consume it, and then we move on.
Well, wait a second. Alan,
For the most part, that's what pop music is. I mean, all you have to do is watch
we
the
haven't
brand
moved
new...
on from the Beatles. We haven't moved on
No,
from...
no. Different sort of pop music. There's the Beatles and some of the other singer-songwriter stuff that we can go very, very deep into, but then there's the stuff that's meant for quick consumption, for casual music fans, for people who want to sing along as they're driving and tap their fingers on the steering wheel. There are billions of them. It's a huge, huge market, and they need to be served, and they get bored very quickly, so you have to give them a continuous turnover of songs that they can sing along to and tap their fingers to. So and again, these artists, these songs generate a tremendous amount of money for their labels and their publishers and everything else, which is then plowed back into the music industry. And that may go to this new garage band out of Leeds that somebody is really interested in, but they're pretty raw and rough and will only be a niche act. So this music is important to the health of the ecology of the music industry. It doesn't mean that all of us have to like it.
But Martina, do you think the people who listen to your music need to believe that music, you woke up one day and it just spilled out of your heart and you wrote it down somewhere and recorded it? Isn't that part of the connection you make with your audience?
I believe that, but I don't know that they care. But I do. I write my own music. My niece last night, she asked me, I was listening to a new song that just got mixed. It just got sent to me. And she's like, do you write your own music?
How old is she, your niece?
She's 16.
16, and so this mattered to
And
her.
so, well, I don't know, that she didn't know surprised me. And the fact that she asked me the question means that she doesn't think that her idols write their own music necessarily. That was my take. Maybe that's not right, but that's what I thought. It was interesting just because I was coming here the next day and I was like, oh. Yeah. And so I don't know if people care. I think they assume that the decision to sing that song is significant enough.
So where does authenticity come into popular music today?
I think it comes from hip hop.
That's true.
It
Okay.
comes from the streets. That stuff is the authentic stuff, I think, in music today. But that stuff is so sort of vulgar and misogynistic in a lot of ways that it's hard for it to be mainstream. I think the authentic stuff is still sort of out there on the fringes, and the mainstream is the factory stuff.
Authentic?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's all in the perception of the person who's listening.
Okay, so is Celine Dion authentic?
I don't know. Not to me.
No. So,
But
she's
I know
an
people.
artist. I don't listen to her, but she's like a tool. Her voice is like one of the most polished tools, and
What's inauthentic about Celine Dion?
I just don't believe her. But there are other people who do and are moved to tears.
You made headlines during the last Grey Cup here in Canada last year when you talked about the Edmonton, well, you don't say the name, right? You don't say the Edmonton Eskimos, who have been the Eskimos since 1949. You've called that name outdated, derogatory, an enduring relic of colonial power. Yes. What kind of reaction did you get when you suggested that was your feeling towards the Edmonton CFL football team?
Well, it was as expected in many ways. There are some people that were sympathetic. Many Canadians just don't care. And then there are also a very loud minority of people who use that opportunity to be rather rude to myself and to Inuit in general. So that's the way that most of the Indigenous mascots issues as sports teams debates have gone. I think that we can move beyond that debate, and I hope that by bringing it up on the in regard to how it affects us as Inuit, that it'll move this debate forward.
Well, last November during Grey Cup week, Bob Weber, writing in the Canadian Press, said the following: "The only Inuk ever to play for the Eskimos, he suited up as a halfback in 1955, said he doesn't have a problem with the name. I think we should take pride in that," said Kivyak, a lawyer known as David Ward, before he fought a legal battle to use his original Inuit name. "I don't understand their argument," he said. What's your reaction?
Well, I think that Justin Trudeau is our Prime Minister. And I could probably go on any street corner in Toronto and find any number of people who would say that they don't believe that he is leading the country in the right direction. That does not diminish the power for him to lead or to make policy. And it is a democratic institution behind him that makes that possible. So I would say for Canadians and for even Inuit who have concerns with the name, that there are democratic institutions that have put me in the position that I'm in, and this is a part of reconciliation.
Have you met with the Edmonton football team ownership over this issue?
Yes.
You have. How'd that go?
It went quite well, actually. There's a lack of knowledge about Inuit across Canada, and the Edmonton football team is no exception. This is a case where we can talk without insulting each other. We can talk without blaming one another for the circumstances that led to this particular name.
But did they tell you they would entertain the idea of changing the team name?
They stopped short of that, but they heard what I had to say. And basically, there are 3 points to this. The first, we've called ourselves Inuit since we mobilized in the early 1970s. The term Eskimos is outdated, and even if some of our people are not offended by it, others are gravely offended by it because they grew up being called that as a derogatory name that was meant to hurt them and to put them down. The second, Inuit are not mascots. We're not monikers. No Indigenous people are mascots, especially if it's for sports entertainment. And for the third, in this era of reconciliation, in this era where we are trying to forge a new path between Indigenous Canadians and all of Canadians, this is one of those areas where we just have to say, times have changed. We don't see you the way we used to see you. As the Prime Minister said, Indigenous lives matter. And that means actually thinking about people beyond just the way that you look at people from the past.
Here is, we're going to call this next graphic that we're going to show here, Educating Owners, because I think you've both said at the end of the day it comes down to the people, not necessarily the dogs. Dog owner perceptions. The Toronto Municipal Licensing and Standards surveyed 1,600 people, both dog owners and non-dog owners, as part of a dog owner bylaw review, and here's what they found. 56% did not know who to report bites to. 78% think that the City of Toronto should increase public awareness and information of dog owner bylaws, and 60% think that the fines ought to be increased. Karen, do you think increasing public awareness and raising fines would be enough to deal with this issue?
I think it would be a start. Being a positive reinforcement trainer, I'm probably going to err on the side of let's reward those who are behaving appropriately. And so perhaps people who take preventative measures by bringing their puppies to a great puppy socialization program to have that sort of behavioral vaccine would be fantastic. And people who are really preventative in their care in the sense of using humane methods as opposed to the old school tools and techniques. Perhaps they could have a break on their licensing fees or home insurance or pet insurance. Fines, I think there is a place for those, and I think they should be high enough to deter anyone from, being negligent.
Does that ever really happen? Fines? I mean, we go to parks all the time and see dogs misbehaving. I've never seen a dog or an owner get fined before.
I've seen it happen before,
You have?
usually in the larger off-leash areas like Cherry Beach and places like that, where the dogs may not be licensed or they're off-leash in an area where they shouldn't be. But it's not like we have enough animal control officers to be monitoring at all times.
Right. If you were to make a checklist of here's what constitutes being a responsible dog owner, tell me some of the things on the checklist.
I mean, I think Karen's mentioned some of them. So it's that early socialization and training, making sure that that's happening, making sure that dog owners understand dog signals so that they're able to respond to them appropriately, that they're teaching other people around them how to properly interact with their dog, specifically children. Children are at a really high risk for bites. So making sure that their own children and children that interact with their dog are educated about what's appropriate. I mean, I think that those are some of the key things that we really need to be thinking about.
Kids are at high risk because?
For a number of different reasons. First of all, they're loud. They're really fast. They play with animals in inappropriate ways sometimes. They don't know how to respect those signals innately. We need to teach them about it. So there's a lot of different things going on. And I mean, I think a big part of it is that adults aren't properly monitoring children when they're interacting with dogs. So they're just really not, paying attention.
So more education for kids, more education for adults too, I guess.
Absolutely.
Like what? What kinds of things what do we need to know more of?
I think the signal side of it, really. I mean, the way to prevent dog aggression is to not push dogs in situations where they're really uncomfortable. And so it's just, if you can recognize when a dog is fearful, then you can avoid pushing them to the point where they feel like they need to behave aggressively.
Well, let's do, for instance, I mean, probably everybody watching this program at some point in their day is going to be walking down the street and seeing somebody walking their dog. What don't you do? I mean, every time you see a dog, you want to go up and pat the dog. What don't you do?
You don't lean over the dog. You don't approach the dog just sort of indiscriminately. You prefer, it's better to let them come to you if possible. Just basically trying to be non-threatening. So if the dog is uncomfortable, turning sideways, not staring directly at them, not doing things that primates really like to do, like hugging and so on. So all of these things are bad behavior in terms of a dog's social repertoire.
Hugging? Who hugs a dog that they don't know? People do that?
Oh, tons of people.
Hug?
Absolutely.
You would go up on the street to a dog you've never seen before and you would hug the dog?
I personally would
not.
not.
No, you would not, of course. But people do that?
They do. They do. I've had people come up to my own dog and hug and kiss and behave really inappropriately. And
do you say anything?
Oh, of course I do. I have a big mouth.
What do you say?
Yeah. I say, get your hands off my dog.
No kidding, just like that?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, oftentimes we say things to humans and they will try to find a reason to sort of turn it around and they'll say, oh, it's okay, I'm great with dogs. And I'm thinking, that's fantastic, I'll get you a medal. However, my dog is not great with you.
When you look at American society now, coming out of the Obama presidency, where there was a lot of division and there was a lot of this sort of nativist rhetoric all throughout, it makes sense that it would bleed into this campaign. And it also fits with the mood of the times. There's such economic anxiety right now, and I think it's at those times when you tend to see nativism kind of crest. So add all of that to the fact that there are votes to be mined, and it's not a shock at all that it's come into play.
Led me nicely to the next question. Michael, can you tell how much of this that the candidates who practice this, how much of this they really believe and how much of this is simply very politically opportunistic?
Well, look, I mean, politics is obviously part show and part reality, so it's a question of how it sort of balances out. I mean, people have sort of argued, to use the name that Darren doesn't want to talk about, Donald Trump. Some people have said that he's actually sort of building a kind of a character that may not necessarily jibe with what he really actually believes in. In other words, does he really want to build a wall and then sort of add another 10 feet to it because Vicente Fox said something nasty to him? Does he really believe that he can take all Muslims out of the United States until things resolve itself and we can figure out this matter better? Again, part of it is unfortunately the way political candidates address themselves and how they address their support base. He knows that the people who support him, all the new supporters, Reagan Democrats, independent right-wingers, et cetera, they want to hear that sort of language. They want to hear that sort of vibe from their candidate, so he plays it up as much as he possibly can. The real trick is, I mean, not long after he started winning states heavily, he then said, look, I can then become more diplomatic. I can become more of a president, more of a leader.
He said that. He said, I'm actually capable of acting more presidential.
Exactly. So what do you really believe? So what really is the real Donald Trump and what's the phony Donald Trump? And that's unfortunately kind of hard to tell.
His nativism, Sylvia, is getting great cheers at public rallies. It is also provoking some relatively strong reaction. we're going to see from this headline. Sheldon, you want to bring this up? This is a headline from USA Today. Louis C.K., the comedian, writes letter. Trump is Hitler. And there's the cut line underneath. Louis C.K. doesn't joke around when it comes to politics, and on and on. Sylvia, how dangerous do you think this nativism is in the current U.S. political setting?
I think that nativism is severe anywhere it occurs. I think we're looking at it in the context of an electoral process in the United States. You know, there's a part of me, frankly, Steve, that really wants to say it exists everywhere Indigenous people have lived around the world, and people got on boats, came to our land, and said, hey, it's terras nullius, we're taking over, and here's the rules. And by the way, the rules happen to go through Anglo-Saxon, European descent males. There is a danger, and we live with it all the time. I think the fact that we're seeing it play out in public media is a bit more honest than it occurs in other ways.
More honest, but it's on steroids in the U.S. right now, isn't it?
And I'm not arguing that, and I'm not arguing that it's acceptable. But at least for once in a very long time in a political process in North America, but certainly in the States, people are maybe probably more honest. I mean, I understand your comments about you know, it's not the real them.
Sure.
My worry is that that is the real them, and what we have seen so far isn't.
It doesn't really matter if that's the real them or not. At the end of the day, if you're stoking and exploiting an undercurrent of fear and Islamophobia and, you know, anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-refugee sentiment, I don't think it really matters whether you believe it in or not. The fact is Donald Trump didn't create this sort of nativism. He's just simply exploiting it. And the fact that he is exploiting it and using it to his advantage and having protesters kicked out of rally now, you know, not necessarily inciting other people to violence, but definitely not discouraging it in any way, I think is really frightening. And I think for the first time, you're hearing different conversations between people of color and between white people. And for the first time in a long time, I think white people on a larger scale are looking at Donald Trump and going, oh, okay, so it's not just fun and games. It's actually dangerous now that people are getting hurt, and this rhetoric has now reached an all-time kind of pinnacle of just ridiculousness.
Darren, though, I mean, the one thing they say about politics, don't ever play the Hitler card. Once you play the Hitler card, that's too much.
Or the David Duke card as well.
Well, and that card's been played. So has Louis C.K. gone too far playing the Hitler card?
Well, I mean, Louis C.K. is a comedian, so he can go as far as he really wants to go. I mean, it is something to tag someone with that, but I think he was just trying to really make people think about this. And just to add to what was said a moment ago, if you sort of think about, like, it's amazing to me that we've gotten to a point where we could actually be discussing the Ku Klux Klan in the 21st century. That's incredible. But, you know, when I saw that controversy, I thought the wrong question was asked, because the question that seemed to be asked is, why did Donald Trump take so long to repudiate them when this was raised? I think the better question is, what's in his message that it seems to appeal so much to the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacists? And so I just agree with the point that it takes us into a dangerous territory, regardless of whether or not it reflects the man's true opinions. In some ways, it's actually worse if you're just exploiting this for political gain.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety on our website at tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on the YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.